Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. This episode is being produced for Forbes, where I'm a contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. We have a rare privilege today to have with us Gary White, who is the CEO and co-founder of Water.org, a remarkable organization that is helping to solve the problem of access to clean water for the 750 million people on this planet who still lack that. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Devin. Great to be here.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Tell us a little bit about the history and the background of Water.org.
Mm-hmm. Well, Water.org was really started to address this incredible crisis that we're facing right now as a planet. And you mentioned about 750 million people without access to safe drinking water, and about 2.5 billion that lack access to sanitation. And so those statistics and kind of the suffering and the deaths, particularly deaths among children under age 5, that lie behind the statistics are what really motivated me and others to undertake this work of Water.org. So we started in 2009, actually as Water Partners, to tackle this issue. And then in 2009, we merged with H2O Africa, which had been co-founded by Matt Damon. And then Matt and I became the co-founders of what's now Water.org, and have joined forces to really hopefully put a dent in this and even ensure that in our lifetime everyone in the world can have access to safe water and the dignity of a toilet.
Well, it is, I think, important to be thinking about this as something that we can do in our lifetime and not just a legacy we may leave for our children or grandchildren. So I commend you for that. Let's go back, Joe. When did you start Water Partners?
Mm-hmm. Well, Water Partners was back in 2009. And at that time, I'd already been kind of working in the sector, the water and sanitation sector, for a few years, starting off at Catholic Relief Services in New York, heading up their water and sanitation for Latin America and the Caribbean. And the impetus behind it really was that there were so many water projects that were being implemented around the world that were no longer working. And so kind of with an engineering background, taking a more analytical approach to it, and trying to figure out, what equated with sustainability and what equated with projects failing, and then trying to build an organization that worked towards those best practices that would correlate with sustainability. And one of the big ahas for us was the buy-in on the part of people in need of safe water, making sure that they were really invested in the projects, making sure that they were more demand-driven, and that they would move beyond just strict charity.
Yeah, it is interesting how much more people value something they pay for than something they get for free, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one experience I had in Honduras back, in the 80s actually, and I was in a village where every household had 3 latrines. And the reason that they each had 3 latrines was 3 different organizations came along saying, we're here to give away latrines. And so, of course, everybody holds up their hand. They say they want one. And, maybe they were storing tools in one, storing grain in one. And if you're lucky, they were using one for defecation. So that whole kind of supply-driven mentality can, it comes out of the best of intentions. But if you're really looking at how are we going to solve some of the globe's most vexing social problems, we've got to move beyond just conventional wisdom. We got to really attract, I think, the best and brightest to dig into these issues and innovate and find, what are the root causes and how do we approach these things from a systemic point of view.
Well, one of your great late innovations is WaterCredit. Tell us a little bit about how that's working and how it functions and how it's actually being deployed and how successful it's going.
Yeah, well, I think some of the things I talked about, what's kind of grown out of that for me is that there's certainly a segment of the population out there that lack water and sanitation, that do need a subsidy, that do need kind of that philanthropic-led approach. But if you think about it, not everyone is equally poor. And there are a lot of people kind of in those different segments that we believe our job to help them isn't charity, but it's to help them tap into what we see as their intrinsic power as customers and as citizens, and help them leverage that power so they can meet their own water and sanitation needs. And so where that led us was to, how do we help people get access to finance, affordable finance, so that they can get the water connection to the public utility, or so they can construct their own toilet. And so what we discovered was that oftentimes the people living in some of these urban slums around the world had the water pipes running right under their feet, but they couldn't afford the roughly $200 that it took to connect to the utility, to become a customer. And so what we discovered was that oftentimes they were going to loan sharks and paying 125% interest so they could get a loan to pay for that connection fee and to get the plumbing to their house, or they were taking those loans for toilets. And so what we decided to do was to nudge microfinance institutions into the water and sanitation space so that women, and it's about 90% of the borrowers under WaterCredit for these loans are women, could get access to affordable finance. And so we've now, through our network of about 50 microfinance partners in different countries, we've been able to extend more than 500,000 loans to people for water and sanitation, and they're repaid at about 99%.
I mean, it's incredible to think about how quickly you've been able to make 500,000 loans. It's not the loans that's impressive; it's the toilets and the water that represents. That's a lot of people getting access, because for each loan there's a household, right? So it's probably 3 or 4, maybe more people per loan now having access to water and a toilet.
Yeah, it is between 4 and 5 people on average per household. And I think the real power behind it is, we talked a little bit earlier about the market approach to this. What we've now done is deploy about $11 million in philanthropic capital to provide this nudge I was talking about, right? So these MFIs need a bit of an incentive to kind of take the edge off their risk, to do the market research, to hire the right people who know water and sanitation. So that $11 million has come from us through donors like the PepsiCo Foundation and Caterpillar and Stella Artois to help us then leverage an additional, and we're getting very close to this, in the next few months we'll be able to pass this mark, but $100 million in commercial and social impact capital that's followed our 11 million in order to get those 500,000 loans out there. And so that power of like $100 million that's actually helping people living in poverty at the base of the pyramid get water and sanitation, to do that in a commercial way, was really unheard of until we were able to scale this up.
It really is exciting to think about it, as you point out, the private capital has an uncanny ability to scale things that philanthropic capital doesn't seem to do as effectively. And maybe you'd comment on that.
Yeah, I think, again, we have to be careful. I got into this because of a deep kind of commitment to social justice and ensuring that the poor have an advocate when it comes to water and sanitation. But what I've discovered is that's not a one-size-fits-all. You can be committed to helping the poor and to social justice and still leverage these forces of capitalism and markets. And my job and the job of Water.org, as I see it, is to work within the slipstream of those natural forces so that the poor can take advantage of those systems and make this happen. And so I think that commercial capital, that private capital, definitely has a role to play, again, if you can kind of mold it in a way that isn't going to take advantage of the poor, but is really actually going to help them reduce their cost of water and reduce their cost of capital. So yeah, it's critical.
It does seem that one of the key elements here is getting the MFIs over the hurdle of making loans for this purpose. It's a little outside of their traditional model because it doesn't create an income stream, it seems to do some other things instead, maybe just as beneficial, but it's probably helping with the health of the household. It's probably freeing up some time. It's probably freeing up capital that could otherwise be used or at least cash flow. What are you seeing on the ground, in fact? Educate us just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the math behind it really does add up, and I think you'll find, and it's not surprising that the poor people are some of the most savvy financial people on the face of the planet because their very existence depends on it. So they're taking out these loans for very rational reasons. And if you look at the fact that women around the world spend about 200 million hours every day walking to collect water, scavenging for water. That's one thing. So there's a huge amount of time that's lost by them if they don't have that water connection at their home. And oftentimes those women are buying water from water vendors so that they don't have to spend that time scavenging. And that water costs about 10 to 15 times more per liter than the water from the tap is going to cost them once they get connected. So right there you can see the math behind this. So we know that women are saving tremendous amounts of money from not having to pay for water. Oftentimes, before they had their toilet at their home, they had to pay to use a public toilet, so they're capturing savings there. And in the time that they would have otherwise spent collecting water, they're now working at paying jobs. Some of them have actually even started small businesses. And so once you can bring kind of the insight in terms of the water and sanitation dynamic on the ground to microfinance institutions and bring them along on this journey, then it starts to click. I mean, that's why these MFIs have now gone out and sourced their own, nearly $100 million in capital, because they do see it as a viable business model. Now, a lot of them do have a social impact kind of mandate wrapped up in their business model, but none of these MFIs can go very long unless they're at least breaking even on these portfolios. And that's what we're here to help them do by giving them some of that startup capital. And we can talk a little bit also maybe about our WaterCredit investment fund that's there also to help them find capital to help them bridge to profitability.
So tell us more about the Water Capital Fund.
The WaterCredit investment fund, yes. So yeah, that's a fund that we've launched. It's an equity fund. We're raising equity capital within the U.S. That will have a targeted financial return to social impact investors of about 2% in addition to the principal. And we'll take that capital, and we have a targeted raise for the first fund of $12 million. We'll deploy that as debt to our microfinance partners. And this fund will start in India. So they can use that debt capital to scale their operations, to build to a larger level where some of them might be right on the bubble with profitability. And so by shaving a couple of percentage points off of the cost of capital for them in India, that could allow them to then break even so that they can grow their business, capture economies of scale, get smarter about it, and then bridge away from that capital. So that's the notion of the fund, and I think it really is, again, the first time that we will see using capital raised with a financial return in the U.S. connecting all the way down to women who are literally making as little as $1.25 a day, tapping into these water credit loans. And we believe if we can connect the dots between that woman borrowing in India and that impact investor in the U.S. and show that it works, then I believe that there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars in impact capital that could flow in to this space.
Yeah, that seems likely, as there is just a rapidly growing demand for impact investments. So it seems to me you're coming at this at exactly the right time, at exactly the right way. Gary, tell us a little bit about why you came at this. There were clearly other options for you. You're a brilliant guy. You could be doing a lot of things. Maybe you could be structuring derivatives on Wall Street. Why this?
Well, I think you have to rewind back to my undergrad days when I was looking at these issues of social justice, and but also felt a strong pull toward engineering. And so when I looked at kind of that intersection of engineering and social justice, you land squarely on this massive problem facing humanity: water and sanitation. And as a civil engineer and environmental engineer, I saw this as a huge problem. In fact, probably the greatest public health problem facing the world when you look at the number of deaths and disease, and it disproportionately affected children. That really got to me as well. That was one side, but the other side was, it's like, we can get this done. To be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel with this. I knew, we've known how to make water safe, in the U.S. and Europe for more than 100 years and have solved this problem. And so to me, the fact that it seemed immensely solvable as well, and that I could kind of apply my entrepreneurial bent to this and innovate in ways that could really let us scale, it seemed just perfect.
Well, and you've made huge progress. I imagine over the years, though, as you've been working on this, there are days when it's frustrating, it's difficult, it's challenging, and perhaps it's those times when you look to some inspiration, to some individual perhaps that is a role model. Who do you think of in that capacity?
Well, yeah, I mean, there certainly are days that are challenging, especially, the organization's growing rapidly, and you have to take great care of not just, the programs that you're doing, but the people and the team and how you're building that, and that takes a lot of work. And but when I think of people, who inspire me, I think, you can't escape people like Mother Teresa, and she's a huge inspiration in terms of what she was able to do. But then when I think a little bit closer to home, I grew up here in Kansas City, and Harry Truman is somebody I think of a lot, who grew up here as well. I mean, he was basically a poor farmer, and the last president we ever had, and probably ever will, who didn't get beyond high school. And basically, someone who created greatness out of nothing. And I think it's people like that that inspire me, and that and how history's judged him. He left the White House with, I think, about a 25% approval rating. But if you look at the polls now, he consistently ranks as one of the top 10 presidents in U.S. history. So he really left his mark.
Yeah, that's a great example. And a great perspective, thinking about the long term instead of the short term as well. Let me ask you, our audience is made up of a variety of people with a very wide-ranging set of interests. But one thing we all have in common is a desire to do more good, have more impact in the world. I wonder if you would just give us one good tip from your experience that we could try to deploy in our efforts to do something good.
Yeah, I think I think of two things, and they're the opposite sides of the same coin. I think be not afraid. If you see something that needs to be done in the world, and you feel like you have you have the skills or the insight needed to change that, lean into it and do it. And the other side of the coin that I've certainly lived through is ignorance is bliss. And when I started into this business, and we started Water Partners back in 1990, I didn't really have an idea, coming out of college, what I was getting into. But when you have an issue that you're tackling, and you have the tenacity, and it is a good idea, things are going to work out. And so I think that lean into it, don't be afraid, but then also be prepared to be surprised a lot.
I think that is a good tip. If it's one thing that any entrepreneur knows, I guess, any good one, is that you've got to be prepared for those surprises. So, well, Gary, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I want to be sure before you leave that you tell us how people can engage with water.org and to learn more about the WaterCredit Equity Fund and other things, because I know we've just teased people with the beginning of some information here, and they'll want to learn more.
Yeah, well, for certain, water.org, the website itself, we're at Water, on Twitter, and on Facebook, we're just /Water. And for those interested in the investment fund, be happy to send me an email, gwhite@water.org, and I will hook you up with the investment fund information and all the way as far as the private placement memo.
Fantastic. Well, Gary, again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. It's been a delight to learn more about water.
Thanks, Devin.
All righty. Let's do some good.